their story. I found something strange on my missing sister's phone. Should we read that one? My roommate's eating habits are getting worse. I met the devil on a bus and he claimed he was God. Part 9. It's the best one. Someone kept making a snowman around my house in the middle of the night. Should we read that one? Oh my god, it's so long. Do you want to see how long this is? Where's my water? Are you ready? I need to zoom in. I feel like I'm zoomed in a bit too much. It's the dead of winter, and here in
Rural.
It's the dead of winter, and here in
Rural.
Minnesota, the weather's been pretty The weather's been pretty much what you'd expect. I'm not too worried about that, though. I've lived up here long enough to know how to properly prepare for the season. Plus, since I generally work remotely, I rarely have much reason to leave the house to brave the elements, even when the weather isn't god-awful. As such, I was expecting a rather uneventful few months, bundled up on my couch with my laptop and a steady supply of hot cocoa. The only downside being that I live out here by myself, though I've never been the type to be bothered too much by solitude. However, it would seem I'm not as alone out here as I thought I was. For the past few weeks now, I've been waking up each morning to find that at some point in the middle of the night, someone has built a snowman somewhere on my property. Every single day, I wake up to find a new one without fail. Now, this would be weird enough on its own, but as I've mentioned, I live in
Rural.
Minnesota. The nearest town is about 20 miles from here, and my nearest neighbor is just over 5. The snow. The snow right now is 2 feet deep at a minimum. It's more than a little odd that someone would come out all this way just to build a snowman, let alone in the middle of the night. That being said, it didn't really bother me at first. From what I can tell from the traces left behind, the culprit seems to be a kid around the age of 12 or so. He always comes by way of the forest that spans the land just north of my little plot. That in itself was odd, given the fact that I don't recall anyone living up that way. But it's not like I'm the most social person anyway. It wouldn't be a surprise to me if I just didn't hear about them moving in. Besides, they are just snowmen. They aren't exactly the most threatening thing in the world. The snowmen themselves are actually pretty well made, too. There are more than a few levels above the clumsily tousled together lumps of snow you'll see outside of some people's homes. Each of the 3 spheres that make up every snowman is perfectly formed, so much so that they almost look manufactured in a way. The kid didn't spare any expense on decorations either. Each snowman has been outfitted with the works, several bits of clothing such as scarves, mittens, and hats, sturdy branches for limbs, and carefully crafted facial features made from stones and other bits likely retrieved from the forest. Admittedly, I did find the fact that they were all made to be frowning and facing towards my house a little... unnerving. I guess I could have just destroyed them or something if they really started to bother me, but I was reluctant to do so. It sort of felt like kicking over a kid's sandcastle on the beach, which unless you're some kind of sadist is anything but a good feeling. Besides, they were harmless piles of snow, and it wasn't likely they were in the way of anything. Unsettling or not, they still weren't anything worth being seriously worried about. Well, I quickly changed my mind about that last night. Hold on. After nearly a month of this going on, I was ready to confront this nightly visitor. I finished all the work I had needed to get done this week, so I figured there wouldn't be any harm in pulling an all-nighter in order to try and catch the kid in the act. I still wasn't particularly bothered by what the kid was doing, but I was starting to get a bit concerned. The temperature was dropping more and more below zero each night, and I was starting to worry about the kid's safety. I had my suspicions as to the reasons behind the kid's odd behavior, and I certainly didn't want to deal with the legal troubles it would bring if they died on my property. I'd hoped that the weather would stay clear for my little stakeout, but I wasn't quite so lucky. As afternoon shifted into evening, the clear patch of weather we'd been in for the past couple of weeks came to an end, as a snowstorm rushed over the mountains and bore down on us. By the time night came around, the storm had begun in full. I could barely see more than a few yards out through my window, and even with the high-powered flashlight I had on hand, I figured the kid wasn't going to be able to make his nightly trip in those conditions. But I decided to stay up just in case. It wasn't like I had anything better to do anyway. By the time 2 a.m. came rolling around, though, I had lost all traces of this previous enthusiasm. I was most of the way through a bottle of wine, and I had long tired of shining my flashlight through my windows and only seeing the figures of the nearest snowmen. I more or less convinced myself that it was about time to give up and turn in for the night. I felt compelled to check one last time, though, if only to satisfy that little stubborn bit of my mind that didn't want to admit that I'd wasted an entire evening. God, I wish I had just gone to bed. Drawing in close to one of my windows, I slowly swept my flashlight across the yard. The storm was still going strong, but the wind had started to die down significantly. It had been fierce, but it seemed as if the storm would be brief, too. I figured that there was a good chance it would be done by morning. The visibility had cleared up significantly, and I could now see more of the snowmen that littered my yard. In spite of the previously howling winds, not a single one of them had been tipped over. After slightly melting and then refreezing once more over the past couple days and nights, the snowmen had all formed a resilient outer shell of ice. It would take more than a run-of-the-mill blizzard to make them budge. They'd probably last till spring. Somehow they almost seemed closer to the house than before. Perhaps they decreased as visibility was making me a bit claustrophobic or something like that. It's hard to say. I did find it a bit jarring, though, all the same. Caught up in my thoughts, I almost didn't notice it. A flicker of movement. Something in between the snowmen that most certainly hadn't been there before. I did a double take, not quite sure if I'd seen what I thought I did. I swept the beam back over the spot where I thought I'd seen it, but it wasn't there anymore. If it had ever been there to begin with, that is.
Perturbed.
I continued to sweep my flashlight across the lawn. I had almost convinced myself. I continued to sweep my flashlight across the lawn. I had almost convinced myself that my lack of sleep was starting to get to me when I heard something. A rustling just to the left of my window. The beam of my flashlight quickly flitted over to where I thought the sound had come from, but I was only able to just barely catch sight of it before it disappeared around the corner of my house. This time, though, I was certain of what I had seen. A flicker of movement, a human figure, and the smallish barefoot of a child just before it disappeared out of sight. I cursed under my breath, pulling on a coat and a pair of boots. Not only was this kid out in this mess, but he was barefoot, if not worse. Where in the heck were this kid's parents, and why in the heck weren't they keeping a better eye on him? I wasn't exactly eager to throw myself out into the blizzard, but I knew I had to. I wasn't even sure if this kid knew where the heck he was, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let this kid die out there on my lawn. Shivering, I went out my back door, ducking around to the side of the house I thought the kid was on. I'd hoped he'd be close to the house still, so I wouldn't have to venture too far off into the blizzard, but I wasn't so lucky. I found his tracks. They were quickly being covered up by the falling snow, but were still clear enough to tell that he'd wandered off further into the blizzard. Letting off more than a few expletives, I hurried off after the kid before I completely lost track of him. I followed the tracks further out towards the edge of my property. I debated calling out for the kid, but decided not to, worried that I might spook him. I strained my eyes and ears to catch some sort of trace of him, but it wasn't easy in the howling blizzard. The snow muffled everything. The wind drowned everything out, and my flashlight beam could only reach so far. I'd walked for a couple of minutes, and all I had seen were the snowmen. The tracks were fading fast, and I was worried I might lose the trail entirely. It was then that I heard it, a sort of rustling and scraping, not unlike a small animal trying to dig itself a burrow. It was the kid. It had to be. I did my best to quiet my steps as I crept closer. We were near the woods at the edge of my property now. I neared the source of the sound, which seemed to be coming from behind a few bushes. Quietly making my way around, I swept my light across the edge of the dark forest, hoping that the kid wouldn't run away at the sight of me. You see, I only see it now, in retrospect, that my entire perception of what had been going on was based on assumptions. I'd come across something unusual and unexplained in my otherwise normal everyday life, and I had automatically done my best to rationalize it. Sure, I may have felt uneasy about what was going on, but I never felt like I was in any sort of danger. Though, when my flashlight beam settled on that thing, hunched over in the snow, I quickly realized that I had been taking things far too lightly. The first thing I realized is that it wasn't just barefoot, it was completely naked. From head to toe, there wasn't a thread to be seen anywhere. That was the least of my concerns, though, as I realized under further examination that what I was looking at may not even be human. Its skin was white with tinges of blue, barely indistinguishable from the snow around it. Its icy hide was pulled taut over its bony frame, which seemed to almost poke through in spots. Its spine stood out in particular, its bony ridges traveling down its hunched back, and leading one's eyes down to its strange, short, and fleshy tail. It had the overall shape and size of a human child, but it was nothing but. It was much more like a naked mole rat, or some sort of hairless cat. It was bent over, its gnarled, root-like hands clawing the surrounding snow together and forming it into a large ball. Its movements were frantic and erratic, like a rodent or cockroach scurrying across the floor. It was so outside the realm of anything I was expecting, my mind couldn't figure out how to react. That quickly changed, though. The flashlight hadn't alerted the creature for whatever reason, but I wasn't able to mask my shocked gasp of breath at the sight of it. It froze, and then quickly whipped around to face me. Its face, it wasn't right. The proportions were all off. The eyes too small, the mouth far too big, the nose was practically non-existent. Its beady black eyes were fixed on my own, and its wide mouth, full of teeth like shards of ice, was fixed in a snarl. My mind caught up with itself, and I felt a fearful chill rush through me. It was so much colder than the blizzard around us. It let out a screech not unlike nails on a chalkboard. I screamed right back, falling backwards as I desperately backpedaled away from it. My flashlight flickered like crazy before going out completely. A few frantic smacks got it working again, and I focused it once more on where the creature had been, but it was nowhere to be seen. I had no idea where it went, but I was certainly not sticking around to find out. I rushed back through the snowmen to my house, and I swear they were all looking at me. Their frowns were deeper, angrier even. I didn't waste any time examining them in any great detail, though, quickly making my way inside the house. I locked all the doors and closed all the curtains and blinds before huddling up on the couch and trying to shiver the chill of fear away. I had my fill of beady black eyes for the evening, on snowmen or otherwise. The night was uneventful after that, thankfully. I fell asleep at some point, my fatigue overcoming my fading panic. I've been trying to convince myself that last night was all just a bad dream or something like that, but I haven't been quite able to manage that. I don't really know what to do about any of this. I mean, I guess I could call the cops, but even if they believed me, it's not like they couldn't even make it out here. The roads are impassable this far out. I'm not even really sure if I'm in any sort of danger or anything really. That creature could have been as scared of me as I was of it. Who knows? All of this is so far outside my realm of experience, I don't feel confident enough to even guess. I'm sure as hell not leaving the house anytime soon, though. You see, when I woke up this morning, all the snowmen had disappeared, without a trace. The snow around where they stood is completely undisturbed. It doesn't look like they were knocked over, carried away, or anything like that. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not setting a single foot outside until I know for sure where they've gone. What do you guys think? Was that it? Yeah. Should we read the comments? Not the greatest story, but not too bad, I guess. What a shit fucking story. There's 6 comments. 10 out of 10 narration, thank you. 10 hours ago somebody said, read this one. It does seem very childlike from the way it reacted to seeing you to the snowmen, which is also odd. Where was it getting clothing to dress them? Why was it doing it at all? A strange childish scare tactic? Especially as the creature itself wore no clothes. Where was it getting them? Now I'm reading the comments. Somebody says it's time to get an escape plan together. Maybe don't leave just yet, but be ready to if things escalate. This creature seems to have power over ice and his intelligence. I get a very sinister vibe from your description. Maybe it created snowmen thinking you wouldn't see them as a threat until it was too late. Somebody said a Wi-Fi security cam would come in handy. Most have night vision and are pretty cheap now, although not sure if Amazon will deliver in that snow. You had a good pace at times, but you were rushing through. Yeah. Well done, Bliss. What is this? I'm not reading this right now. I'm feeling a bit chilly in this wind. Go to no sleep and read top all-time posts. How long is it? No, you know what? If it's all time, it's I bet you it has like several parts to it. I bet you. The girl in the velvet dress. Oh my god, this is so long. It's not the all-time one. What's the all-time one? Link it. I don't see. Wait, no, that's past 24 hours. Oops, all-time. My sugar daddy asks me for weird favors. That's so long, though. Should we read this? That's not a scary story, that's just real life. No. Hi, John. My job is watching a woman trapped in a room. Oh, that's a long one, too. Should we read that? Oh, there's a part 2 to it also. A very interesting and relevant titles. You're not wrong. No? Spooky, right? Was that written by one of your moderators? My girlfriend talks in her sleep. She's been saying some of the most horrible things recently. What? I answered a spam call. I have an unusual job. This is what this... Okay, this is interesting. Should we read this one? What's gonna sleep with Granny tonight? Bliss can stalk me anytime. So relevant, actually scary. Oh my god, okay, I read it. This is a scary urban legend called Humans Can Lick Too, or The Licked Hand. It's about a beautiful young girl who was left home alone one night, but protected by her dog, which is a very large collie. The parents told the girl to lock all the windows and doors after they had left, but there was one window in the basement that would not close completely. Trying as best as she could, she finally got the window shut, but it would not lock. So she left the window and went back upstairs, but just to make sure that no one could get in, she put the deadbolt lock on the basement door. Then she sat down, had some dinner, fed her dog, and decided to go to sleep for the night. Settling down, she snuggled up in bed. Her dog slept underneath her bed. She reached her hand down and let her dog lick it as she said good night. But during the night, she woke up with a start. The girl lay there wondering what had woken her when suddenly she heard a noise. It was a dripping sound and seemed to be coming from the bathroom. She must have left the water running and now was dripping into the drain of her sink. So thinking it was no big deal, she decided to go back to sleep. But she felt nervous, so she reached her hand over the edge of her bed and let the dog lick her hand for reassurance that he would protect her. Again, at about 3:45, she woke up, hearing dripping. Again, she reached down and let the dog lick her hand. Then she fell back to sleep. At 6:52, the girl decided that she had had enough. She got up just in time to see her parents were pulling up to the house. Good, she thought. Now nobody can fix the sink, because I know I didn't leave it running. She walked to the bathroom, and there was the collie dog, skinned and hung up on the curtain rod. The noise she heard was its blood dripping into a puddle on the floor. The girl screamed and ran to her bedroom to get a weapon, in case someone was still in the house. And there on the floor next to her bed, she saw a small note written in blood saying, "Humans can lick too." Why did you do this on Halloween? I should have. That's a good one. Are you happy? Are you bored? Honestly, I should be ending stream. Bliss, read. Bliss, the scariest short story you've ever read. Here's one that scared the living shit out of me when I was younger. A young boy is sleeping in his bed on a usual night. He hears footsteps outside his door and peeks out of his eyes to see what is happening. His door swings open quietly to reveal a murderer carrying the corpse of his parents. After silently propping them up on a chair, he writes something on the wall and the blood of the dead bodies. He then hides under the child's bed. The child is scared beyond belief. He can't read the writing on the wall, and he knows the man is under his bed. Like any child, he pretends that he slept through the whole thing and hasn't awoken yet. He lays still as the bodies quietly, hearing the breaths from under his bed. An hour passes and his eyes are adjusting more and more to the darkness. He tries to make out the words, but it's a struggle. He gasps when he finally makes out the sentence. I know you're awake. He feels something shift underneath his bed. That's not the full story. That's not even the full story. What was the point? I want to read this one. I want to read the Tinder one or whatever. It's not? No. Hold on. His Tinder profile said he was 45, but he looked to be in his early 30s at most. Looking for a sugar baby, 700 weekly, no sex. It sounded too good to be true. But as a broke university student, I was willing to take my chances. I swiped right, and Tinder let me know it was a match. His message came up seconds later. Hey there, sweetheart. I cringed at that word. I hated it. But $700 was $700, so I sucked it up and replied, hey, winky face. His name was Jack, and he told me he owned his own business, although he never specified what kind of business it was. We talked for a while before he asked me for my Venmo to send me the first payment. After a few minutes, I got the notification. I stared at the $700 for at least 20 minutes, expecting to wake up from a dream at any second, but it wasn't a dream. You still there? I clicked on the message. Yeah, sorry. If you don't mind me asking, what are you looking for in return? I stared at the chat until he replied, I'm just looking for you to do a few favors for me, smiley face. That sounded like it was going to be sexual to me. Like what? For example, the first thing I need you to do is pick up a delivery for me. That sounded innocent enough, but I was still expecting there to be some kind of twist. $700 to pick up a package? Come on, even I wasn't that naive. From the post office or something? No, I'll send you the address, but I'd rather not do this through Tinder. You got Kik? Or you can give me your number? Kik, what was this, 2011? I decided to give him my number instead, and he texted me the address immediately, followed by the address to his house, where I would have to drop off the package. I'm not home right now, but there's a key on the bottom of the blue flower pot near the door. Go inside and put the package on the coffee table in the living room. Make sure that you lock the door when you go inside the house, and then lock it again when you leave. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and got into my car, putting the address into Google Maps. Got it! On my way. My phone buzzed as I backed out of my driveway. I'm serious. Lock the door. Both times, please. I thought that was a little excessive, but I had promised him that I would. The house looked abandoned. It had a broken chain link fence around it, with a small door that was hanging on to dear life. It stuck out like a sore thumb, surrounded by houses that were a lot nicer than this one in comparison. "You here for Jack's shit?" I looked up to see a man standing in the open doorway of the house. He took up almost the entire space, his head skimming the top of the door frame. He was huge, in height and muscles, and his entire torso was covered in tattoos. Yeah, I guess," I replied, not moving from my spot on the sidewalk. "Stay right there," he said. I did. I actually don't think I would have moved if he had asked me to. I looked around and realized that there was no one else on the street. I was a 21-year-old woman alone in the street. I gripped my car keys. A few minutes later, the man came back out carrying a cardboard box. It was about the size of a shoebox, but stained and damp on some of the corners. "Can you open your car?" he asked. I opened the trunk, not wanting that inside on my car seats, and he set it in. "All right, there you go," he said. "Thanks," I replied. I walked around to the driver's side of the car and opened the door. "Oh, and one more thing," he said. I looked at him. "Watch out," he said. I didn't reply. I blasted my music as I drove to Jack's house, hoping it would drown out my anxiety. It didn't. I parked my car in the stone driveway and stayed inside the car, admiring the house. It was a huge house with stone pillars on the front porch and the greenest grass I had ever seen in my life. I turned the car off and got out. I grabbed the package and walked to the front door, getting the key from where he said it would be. I opened the door and stepped in, closing it behind me. I thought about what he had said about locking the door when I got inside. I thought that was a little overboard, but as I stared at the closed door, something made me reach out and lock it. I walked inside, my feet cushioned by the thick maroon carpet, and admired the inside of the house. All the furniture was wooden and looked incredibly expensive. I would probably finish school a dozen times with the money that it took to furnish this place. I set the package down on the coffee table, and as I walked back to the door, I heard a phone ringing from somewhere inside the house. I froze. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I took it out to look. Don't answer any calls that aren't from Marvin. I put my phone back and followed the sound of the phone, poking my head into a few different rooms before I found it in an office. I walked over to the desk and looked at the caller ID, incoming call from Jack. That was odd. I grabbed my phone to look at the message again. I was starting to get a little bit creeped out and decided I wouldn't answer just to be safe, and left the house, remembering to lock the door as I left. I've done a few more favors for Jack since then. I drove my BMW to a random park in another city, only to get out and drive a different car back to Jack's house. He had me meet one of his employees at lunch, who then gave me a briefcase to deliver to the first house I had gone to, and told me he would know if I looked inside. On several occasions, he asked me to drive down to that same house and stay with the guy, whose name is Julio, for a certain amount of time. In total, I've made around $3,500. Most recently, Jack asked me to stay in his house overnight. I woke up to a text message from him. "I need you to spend the night at my house." I hadn't ever